Today we will talk about a hidden force that kept the greatest empire in history, the British Empire, standing, yet is rarely discussed. When we think of empires, powerful navies and massive armies usually come to mind, but behind all of this stood a far more decisive factor: money. In this video, we will explore how India became not merely a colony, but a silent treasury and the banker that financed Britain's global ambitions. We will see how a country's wealth, through taxes, trade manipulation, and economic control, flowed thousands of kilometers away to London, and how this process destroyed local industries. Most surprising of all is the fact that India was sometimes forced to pay even the costs of its own occupation. Let us together look behind the scenes at how empires are built not only with swords, but also with accounting ledgers and economic rules. When we speak of the British Empire, what usually comes to mind are powerful warships crossing the oceans and an empire that claimed to bring order, law, and industry to the world. But beneath all of this lay something far less visible and far more important: money. Running empires is an extremely costly undertaking. Armies, administrators, ships, railways, diplomacy, and constant expansion, all of this requires enormous financial power. And for Britain, one place quietly became the financial backbone of its global ambitions: India. Behind the rise of the British Empire, India played a major role as a silent treasury. This was not a process born of a single decision made in one day, but rather a gradual transformation shaped by the manipulation of trade and the restructuring of taxation. As a result, India was turned into a system that generated immense wealth for the empire, and these resources were transferred out of the country to finance Britain's rise to global superpower status. By the early 19th century, London had become the main center of global finance. British politicians and businessmen often presented this success as proof of superior management and innovation. Yet behind this image stood the revenues extracted from India. Those who symbolically called India the jewel in the crown knew very well that it was, in reality, the empire's hidden banker. Under British rule, India was reshaped not according to the benefits it provided to local communities, but according to which sectors could maximize revenue. The shift of taxation from produce to cash pushed peasants into a desperate situation. Farmers who had previously paid taxes partly in kind were now required to pay in cash. This meant that they either had to sell their crops at extremely low prices to meet tax demands or lose land that had belonged to their families for generations. For Britain, this meant stable income. For Indians, it meant constant economic pressure. Through control over taxation and trade, local industries, especially textiles, were destroyed by British industrial goods backed by political power. British companies took control of export sectors such as cotton, opium, indigo, and tea, forcing entire regions to reshape themselves according to imperial demand. Raw materials extracted from India were cheap to produce, processed in British factories, and then brought back to India as expensive finished goods. Local crafts and industries could not compete with this system. British industrial textiles, supported by political power, pushed indigenous craftsmanship out of the market, and as a result, cities that had been centers of textile skill and tradition for generations fell into decline. The wealth extracted from India later received a name from historians: the drain of wealth. The idea was simple yet devastating. Money collected in India through taxes, profits, and salaries flowed to Britain and did not return. It financed wars fought far away. It supported the Royal Navy. It funded British railways and infrastructure that were often built outside India. Even British officials who received high salaries paid from Indian revenues spent most of that money within the British economy. In essence, India was financing both the empire that ruled it and that empire's further expansion across the world. According to historical accounts, one of the greatest ironies in history is that India paid the costs of its own occupation. Indian soldiers were recruited into the army in massive numbers. Their origins lay in communities with ancient military traditions and strict discipline. Yet these soldiers, whose wages were largely paid through Indian taxes, were used to strengthen British control and conquer other territories. Campaigns in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East were often supported by Indian manpower and Indian money. Meanwhile, ordinary Indians struggled to survive under heavy taxation, recurring famines, and limited material means. Railways introduced to India were often portrayed in imperial narratives as symbols of progress. But the steel rails of that era were laid not like veins nourishing the country from within, but like determined arrows pointing directly toward the ports. Even the most modern technology of the time, the railway, served less to improve local lives than to move raw materials to the coasts as quickly as possible. The sound of train wheels was not the promise of internal prosperity, but the rhythm of a mechanism designed to extract wealth from the country. When the railway map was drawn, internal development and the needs of the population were forgotten at the table. All attention was focused on transporting wealth and serving external markets. Domestic progress remained only a secondary detail in this grand design. British investors secured guaranteed profits, while the risks were often borne by Indian taxpayers. Development did occur, but it was selective and always subordinate to one question: how does this benefit imperial revenue? Perhaps the most painful consequence of this system was vulnerability. When drought or crop failure struck, local populations had no reserves. There might be grain in warehouses, but it was still exported because contracts and profits were prioritized over the needs of the population. Famines in colonial India were not merely natural disasters. They were political and economic catastrophes created by policy. As money flowed outward, human life became cheaper. Gradually, voices questioning this system began to rise. Indian intellectuals, economists, and political leaders started to analyze the numbers and realized that independence was not simply about raising a new flag. It meant reclaiming financial sovereignty. They argued that as long as India's wealth continued to drain outward, true freedom would remain impossible. This shifted the philosophy of the independence movement. It was no longer only about national pride. It was about economic justice. Who controls taxation? Who directs investment? Who benefits from labor and resources? These questions began to reshape political movements. When independence finally arrived in 1947, centuries of financial damage did not disappear overnight. The wounds had not fully healed. Infrastructure was uneven, industry was limited, and poverty was widespread. Rebuilding, reforming, and reimagining an economy that had been deliberately structured to serve others' interests required many long years. India's journey is not only a story of hardship, but also one of extraordinary resilience and renewal. Despite all obstacles, the country managed to preserve its cultural, social, and moral foundations, and eventually restore itself economically as well. The deeper lesson drawn from this history is universal. Empires rarely survive on military power alone. They are sustained by control over financial systems. Those who control taxes, banks, and trade rules also control the future. India's role as the financial house of the British Empire shows that power is often built not loudly, but quietly, in accounting books, contracts, and laws. It also shows us that to understand the true nature of history, we must learn the language of economics. Behind every political decision lies a financial motive. Behind every expansion lies a revenue plan. In reality, behind every powerful state stands a source of wealth like India, an economic center that makes everything possible. If we imagine history as a giant clock mechanism, economics is the set of gears that keeps it running, and sources of wealth like India are the winding key that ensures the mechanism never stops. Thus, the story of India and the British Empire is not merely about domination and resistance. It is about how money moves, who decides its path, and how those decisions shape the lives of millions. By remembering this, we see that history is not just a tale of the past, but a crossroads of people, interests, and power, where economic force is often more effective than even the sharpest weapon. Thank you for watching us. If this topic was interesting to you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. In the upcoming videos on this channel, we will take a deeper look at history, economics, and the major processes shaping the world. Your opinions are important to us as well. Share your thoughts in the comments. Remember, those who understand the past build the future more correctly.